Math 76, Lesson 21, Comparing Fractions with Pictures. So this is where we're going to have to get a little bit of art into our math, or we get to practice drawing some of our shapes, which is actually a bit of a struggle for me, and I had trouble learning this. So I've come up with a couple of tricks. Some of them you'll see in your book, some of them I kind of made up on my own that will help us draw these different types of fraction circles and rectangles. So let's just go ahead and represent some different fractions here. And I'll show you some of the tricks that I've learned. I'll start off with rectangles because those are a little bit easier. So let's do some basic fractions. Let's say we'll do 1/2, we'll do 1/3. Let's fix our focus before we keep moving on. It's a little blurry. Wait, let me see here. That's better. Okay, so we'll do 1/2, 1/3, 1/4. That one's still pretty easy. We'll do 1/5, 1/6, and 1/7. We'll even do 1/8. 1/8 usually isn't too difficult, but the ones that I had the most trouble with were these ones, 5 and 7. So let's start with some rectangles. So let's say we have to draw a rectangle and we have to cut it into halves. So the first thing we'd do is we would just draw a rectangle. We can draw this horizontally or vertically. I'll do vertically so that way it's easier for me to section this off on the page. So I've got a rectangle and I need to show the fraction 1/2 on this rectangle. So all I'm going to do is going to go halfway through the rectangle. I'm going to draw a line. So now I've cut the rectangle into 2 even parts, which matches, which matches our denominator. And then to show 1/2, I will go ahead and shade in half the rectangle. Right? And you can go ahead and just do a nice little zigzag line like that for your shading. It doesn't have to be perfect. I know some of you are going to be really meticulous. You're going to want to shade every single corner in space. But for speed and ease, it's perfectly acceptable to draw 1 or 2 little squiggly lines. You don't have to fill in every space. What I would prefer to not see is, please don't do the scribble like that. That's a little strange. I'd much rather see just a nice clean zigzag like that. This is just hard to look at. It doesn't look as neat. So you can do a nice little neat squiggle, and then that'll show your shading, so it still looks pretty good. Now half is pretty easy, and what you'll notice with 1/2, 1/4, 1/6, and 1/8 is I'm going to show you the same method for all the even numbers. So if you're drawing fractions with even numbers, it's pretty simple. You just keep using this halving method. So for 1/4, I'll go ahead and I'll draw a rectangle. If I need to shade 1/4 of it, I'll go ahead and take that rectangle, cut it in half. I now have 2 equal pieces. In order to get to 4, I just take those halves and I cut those into 2 equal pieces. So now I've got 1, 2, 3, and 4. All right. So to shade 1/4, I'll just go to 1 and I'll do a nice, neat, squiggly line, and I've shaded 1/4. Now before I go to 1/6, we have to deal with 1/3. Now odd numbers. This is where I had my trouble when I was learning these, because it was hard for me to fraction out. Now what I do for odd numbers is I'll just draw 2 horizontal lines. I'm not going to finish the rectangle, because if you're like me, you're probably going to mess up on your sizing, which is what I would always do. Now instead of drawing a line in the middle, I'm going to draw one section in the middle. So I'm going to go to about the middle of the lines, and I'm going to draw a piece. Now that piece is now 1/3. Now what I want to do is I want to go that same space above and below and add sections on. All right. So there's another piece, and there's another piece. So now I have a rectangle with 3 pieces, and if I'd done this in pencil, which I think I've told you guys this before, I don't use pencil on these videos because it's very hard for the camera to see. But if I'd done this in pencil, I'd go ahead and erase the ends, so that way I have a nice neat box. So we'll just pretend I did that. Pretend I erased those little extra pieces. And then to shade 1/3, I can just do this nice squiggly line like that. So on odd numbers, you're going to draw 2 lines in the middle instead of 1. Now, the reason why I bring that up before I go to 1/6 is I'm going to have to use that method after I have the rectangle. So for 1/6, since it's an even number, I know I'm going to have to cut it in half, right? So I go halfway through the rectangle, I draw the line in the middle, and then I have to have 3 spaces on each end. And if I half this, then I'll end up with a fourth, and then I can't turn that into a sixth. So once I cut 1/6 into a half, I then have to cut each half into thirds. So I'll go to about the middle, and I'll draw 2 lines instead of 1. So now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 roughly even size squares. Now they're not perfect, but they're pretty close. And then I shade that, and I've got 1/6. Now 1/5, I'm going to use this method that I used on a third. I'm going to draw some vertical lines, and about the middle, I'm going to box off what I guesstimate to be about 1/5, and then from there I just add more sections above and below. So I've got 1 out of 5 pieces, which means I'm going to have 2 above and 2 below. So I'll mark off 1, 2 above, and then 1, 2 below. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces. They're about the same shape, and then I can go ahead and shade 1 out of 5. All right. If this is pretty easy for you, you can go ahead and fast forward up to the circles, but I'm going to go ahead and continue with 1/7 and 1/8. 1/7, like 1/5, is going to have to be pretty similar method. 2 vertical lines. I'm going to estimate what I think a 1/7 is going to be in about the middle. If I take 1 away from 7, that means I need 3 above and 3 below. So that's 1, 2, and then I can lengthen my lines out, 3, and then below 1, 2, and 3. So now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pieces. I shade 1, and I've got 1/7. And now let's go to 1/8. This one's pretty simple. I just draw a rectangle, cut it in half. So I've got 2 pieces, cut each of those in half. I've now got 4 pieces, cut each of those in half, and then I've got 8 pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I will shade one of those. All right, now let's go on to circles. I'll go ahead and switch over to purple for circles. And I'll redraw these fractions so we can see them again right above our shapes. So we've got 1/2, 1/3, 1/4, 1/5, 1/6, 1/7, 1/8. Okay. So for circles, instead of drawing the rectangle in half, I'm going to be cutting the circle in half. So for 1/2, I'll just draw a circle and then put a vertical or horizontal line right down the middle. Okay. For 1/4, I do the same thing, but I'm just going to do multiple lines. Now, when you're dealing with circles, you got to remember that they have a center, and that's how you're going to be cutting it, kind of like a pie. So that's 1/2. Cut it the other way. I've got 1/4. All right, and I forgot to shade these in. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and shade in half my circle. I'll shade in 1/4 of my circle. All right, and then we'll go to the tough one now, 1/3. Now, the trick I figured out for circles is they're never going to be perfectly cut in half. You'll never have a perfectly halved line in the middle. So for a circle, what I'll do is I'll put a dot for the center. I'll go straight to the dot, and then before I go straight down, I'll kind of bend that line and make it crooked, right? So from there, all I have to do to make 1/3 is just draw another crooked line. And I've got 1, 2, 3 roughly equal pieces, right? So that's how I do odd numbers for circles. And I'll show you this again on 1/5. So for 1/5, I draw the circle, put a dot for the center. I go down to the dot, and then I break the line. Now, since this is more than 3 pieces, I have to remember that there's going to be an uneven amount on each piece of the pie. So the smaller amount is going to have 2 pieces. The larger amount is going to have 3. And 2 and 3 add up to 5. So I'll just take this one, I'll cut this one in half, and then I'll take this one and I'll cut it into thirds. And I've got about 5 equal pieces. And then I can go ahead and shade 1/5. Now 1/6 is really similar to a 1/4 but like we saw before with the rectangles, 1/6 is going to be a little bit odd. So for 1/6, we'll go ahead and start with 1 vertical line cutting it in half, but then we remember that each of these halves has to have 3. So I'm going to take each of these halves and I'll cut them into 3 pieces that are about the equal size. Or what you may notice is on the 6, since it's an even number, it's still made up of straight lines. Right? So you can draw a straight line and then an X, and that will also get you 1/6. Okay, so I'll go ahead and shade. All right, now 1/7, I'm just going to follow the same rule I did for a 1/3 and a 1/5. I'll draw my circle, put a center line, go straight to the center line, and then I'm going to go ahead and bend that line. All right, I know I need 3 pieces in the smaller portion, 4 pieces in the larger portion. So for the 3 pieces, I'll go ahead and draw 2 lines. And then for the larger portion, since it's going to be 4 pieces, go ahead and cut it in half, and then cut each of those in half. And I've got 7 almost equal sized pieces. All right, the last one, 1/8, just like a 1/4 and a half. I'm just going to keep cutting it into halves. So straight line, and then I've got 4 pieces, and each of those need to get cut in half, and then I can just go ahead and X those, cutting all 4 of those in half. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, now that's drawing fractions and shapes. When it comes to your homework, what they're going to have you do is they're going to be having you do comparisons between fractions, and they'll say draw and shade circles to illustrate these comparisons. They won't have the answers here for you. What they want you to do is draw the shapes and then use those shapes to determine whether or not they're equal, greater than, or less than. Okay, and like for example, this one 2/4. Instead of shading 1/4 of my rectangle or 1/4 of my circle, I would go ahead and shade 2 pieces out of 4. So it should be pretty self-explanatory. Hope you guys understood my drawings. And if you have any questions, let me know on the school's website. I will see you in class.